You do you want to introduce or?
Yeah. Let me do that.
Okay.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Panels on Pages podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about comic books and all related media. Today, I am joined by Pop Culture Rabbi of TikTok fame. Just killing it out in these streets, having some wild thoughts on the multiverse. We're going to be talking about the MCU Multiverse and what it all means. Maybe we can straighten it out for everyone else that's confused.
I hope so. I'm going to actually just change my name for a second so people can follow me if they want. There's no pressure.
They absolutely should.
But we'll put the name up there.
I appreciate you calling out that I appreciate you. I just caught your returning red response video to that other channel. I appreciate you calling that out. That was so wild, especially for someone to say, "Oh, we turned it off after 5 minutes." Then you don't know anything about it. Right. That will be me like picking up the Bible and being like, "Nah, 3 pages in, it really wasn't hitting for me."
I mean, it was just so pretentious to hold a Bible there and talk about a movie, waving it around like it's a prop, like it's a sword or shield. It's the Bible, and it should be. I mean, any writing should be treated with more respect, I think, than he was. But that it sends such a message to have to use the Bible in that way.
And I'm a person that like I will hear people out. And I like some of the ideas that are taught in religion. I'm not a religious person at all. I kind of have my own thoughts about things and how things work. But it's like I whereas I have like gone on record that I hate the idea of organized religion, like generally speaking. Some of the aspects of it, very like the community, like the positive aspects, like if you could extract the positive aspects and leave them there, I would love it. But like, it's kind of a package deal. But it's like I've said that, and I would still never like. I remember being this was like, shoot, man, I'm old now. I was gonna say I was almost like 20 years ago. It's like when you say that, like 2 decades, like that was a long time. But like I was like I went with my girlfriend at the time. We went to a Christmas mass, and she was like a complete non-believer, but her mom was like, "Go take him to Christmas mass," and I was like, I'm cool with that because I've been to church before. I've been to church many times, and like I was raised Muslim, and I've like had more experience in churches, Christian churches and Catholic churches than anything else, ironically. But it's like we go there, and I just kind of like I took the time to like I'm just gonna have this moment, a little bit of introspection, and she's like trying to like fool around, and I was like, we are in a church, bro. Like at no point is this okay. Like.
Well, when the spirit grabs you.
Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll just say like, and this was the point I was making to that commenter was just, so much of religion has to do with the user. And it's the same thing in our world of comic books and pop culture. We have our gatekeepers, and we have our people that say like, you can't comment because you don't know Marvel as well as I do, or DC, or
I hate Star Wars. So much. Like the asking for the receipts. How many of you read? Do you even read comics? Like they did that a lot. I feel like it's changed a little bit in the video game culture because I feel like there is more spotlight on female players, but like 10, not even 10, like 5 years ago, if you were a girl gamer, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, how many Call of Duties have you played? How many this? Like what's this character's backstory?" Like people would just try to do that shit, and thankfully, I think now it's a little bit better. It's certainly not great, but it's wild to me. And it's one of those things that I never thought about. And the one time, and this is kind of a double-edged sword story. Like the one time I was ever challenged on my actual like knowledge and of comics was I went to a cosplayer at a convention 15 years ago, and I was like, "Oh my good, like no one cosplays it. Can I just take a photo?" And she's like, "Only if you could tell me who it is." And like I didn't think about it in that moment. I thought at that moment I was like, "How dare she?" I'm like, Gwen Stacy, obviously. duh, like who doesn't know that? Right at the moment, I was like, how dare she ask me this? How would I not know this? Because I'm thinking everyone's here, everyone should know. But then, like, in retrospect, years later, I was like, oh my God, this was a fucking safety maneuver. Like the obscenity of that, like she would have to do that. And they still do. Like, a lot of people still have to do. It's insane. Like the toxic fandoms that exist, it just blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind.
And it's so interesting that I see, having come in, I only came into TikTok 2 months ago now. Like,
oh wow. Moving quick.
But I see, that's what she said. But
a classic.
Thank you. But I see so many parallels between any of these like subcultures and religion and toxic religion. And it's like, because I did say to this guy, it's like, you're holding the Bible, you're gatekeeping, man. Like, give us a verse so we can really discuss it and argue it. And I mean, what we're basically going to do today, right? It's like,
and the funny thing is, it was a sales pitch, because that whole little clip was aggressive in nature. It was like, I've got some shit to say about this, and it was to direct you to the YouTube video, because I jumped on, and it's a 24-minute video, and I listened, like, I clipped forward a little bit, and I was like, nah, because he did eventually read, but at the same time, it's like, he went into this whole thing about like parental disobedience and how the young people are like very, like, can be very influenced easily, and the whole thing is about how, like, the devil is everywhere, he's trying to influence you. And it's like, well, right, but like, it's not like just the devil. Like, it's not the devil is not like devil everywhere, this is where God is in this book. Like, that's not how it works, I'm pretty sure. Like,
no, and it was interesting too, because like, I, of course, as a person of religion, I took it completely differently, and I was watching it as, the fifth commandment, honor your mother and father, and this is the whole thing that people misunderstand with the Bible is it says something like honor your mother and father. It doesn't tell you how. Right. It doesn't tell you what that actually means.
It's general guidance.
It's general guidance. Honor them. And then you have to have a discussion about what does it mean. And this goes to, all those people that go like, politics don't belong in comic books. It's like, if you're not reading comics and you don't recognize the deeper subtext, or you deny it, don't tell me what that comic's about.
Right. I'm sorry. I am a very self-admitted surface level media consumer. Like, I don't do a lot of like while I'm reading, like, noticing deep things like that. But like, I understand that they're there. Like, right. I watched the X-Men animated series. That was like one of my first exposures to the like superheroes and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And I learned that racism is bad from the X-Men. Did I learn it by someone telling me outright? No, but it was built within the message. It was entertaining. For me, it was Wolverine cutting up people, Cyclops blasting out, I-beams at people. That's what the show was when I was a kid. But then, like, the lessons were built in. The lessons of camaraderie, found family, all of these things were in there. But it's like, I never even thought about those things until I started listening to the Jan Miles Explain the X-Men podcast. And they go into really wonderful, deep exploration of theme and subject and cultural significance and sociological, like, things that are happening around the books. It's such a great podcast. I couldn't recommend it more. And like, listening to it, that was the first time I heard the idea of found family. And I was like, oh my God, that's why X-Men resonates with me so much. Because, like, I'm from another country, so like, I was pulled away from my family, pulled away from my friends. So like, the concept of like finding a place to belong, regardless of how much of an outsider you are, like, holy crap, like, I didn't even, like, that was a subconscious thing that gravitated towards me. So like, it's all there. And it's like, especially, that's the funny thing is, especially people who complain about like changes and these like political subjects in X-Men, and I'm like, you haven't read the X-Men. Like, it's like,
I mean, Kurt Nightcrawler leaves Germany. He's being chased. His first appearance, he's being chased by all those villagers.
Yep.
And Professor X goes, "Hey, you want to come be a part of my family?" And he's like, "Yeah, that sounds good." And pops out, and it like
it's wild. It's wild to like, and it like Star Wars fans are the same. Not all of them, obviously, but it's like there is a hugely like toxic segment of the Star Wars community that's just like everything that every new change. I mean, hell, even the like when they did the what was it called, Star Wars Visions, where they're like, oh, it's like anime influence. There was a bunch of people that were like, keep this Japanese influence out of Star Wars, and I was like, do you not know Star Wars? Do you not know that it's like half based on Japanese videos and movies? Like,
I did a TikTok on that, actually, very short one, but on Kurosawa.
I just the wildness of people.
Just because I know that Star Wars is based on Kurosawa doesn't make me a better or worse Star Wars fan than anybody else.
Like you said, it's very much from like the user perspective. It's the reader that interprets the whatever the message is. And I had a moment that like I almost was gonna gatekeep just because I'm like, no, that's not what that's about. But then I literally stopped myself and I was like, it was Straw Hat Goofy. He was talking about the Captain America costume on Captain. By the way, ever since they announced Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I kept calling it Captain America and the Winter Soldier. So that's why I was like vindicated when the last title card was Captain America and the Winter Soldier. I was like, the whole time for months I've been calling it Captain America and the Winter Soldier. But he was talking about his suit and how the two stripes, and he was referring to some stuff where they do in the Air Force when like one of their squad dies and they do this thing, and like he brought this whole meaning to these lines in the costume, and I was just gonna be like, I was ready to be like, no, that's just what, like, it's just copying the costume from the comics, and I don't think like there's nothing to indicate that. Then I was like, why would I take that away from him?
Right?
That's a beautiful thing he's brought to it for himself. He's shared it with others. Others might gravitate toward. Why would I take that? What a silly thing to say to someone. Oh, no, that's not factually correct. You're reading it wrong. Like, that's the dumbest thing. So I was like, let it go. Just walked away.
And I think we all have moments like that. You know, I mean, I know I do. I'm incredibly well read, and there are definitely moments where I want to be like, hey, you know, I want to jump on my computer and say, you're not reading this right. And it's like, what am I gaining by this? But, you know, I was thinking about one of the issues that you brought up with Cap. You know, if he goes back in time and exists in either timeline and doesn't interfere, that creates a lot of issues with
there are moral questions for sure.
There are moral questions, but it's exactly those moral questions that are interesting. That to me, it's like, I don't need to shy away from those. You know, it doesn't, you know, destroy everything. And honestly, you know what? It might make me dislike Cap in the end if I find, you know, and a writer makes that choice to say, oh yeah, no, Cap hung up the shield and just waited for the other Cap to thaw out, and, you know.
So let's just dive into it. I've got so many things I want to talk about. All right, so let's dive into it. Here are the things that happened, like IRL, real world, that kind of have spurred this debate at all. When Endgame came out, it was a couple months later. The Russos were on a interview of some sort, and they were like, "Oh, he went back in time and lived in an alternate reality with Peggy," and that just for me threw up huge red flags, because I'm like, that's morally wrong. Because it's like, if that were to be correct, he took this woman who had a wonderful life, had children, had a family, and said, I don't want you to have that because I want to have you for myself. That's ridiculous. And could that be true? Sure, but that not only would make me hate Cap, that would give me some real reservations about the Russo storytelling. And it's like, if they were to come on another Marvel project, I'm like, who are they going to screw over next? Who are they going to like ruin as a character in my eyes, at least, next? So that to me is never sat right. And then the writers had a completely separate interview, and they were like, oh yeah, when we wrote The Winter Soldier, we had always intended, like, that was always the plan, is to have him go back in time and be the husband. And then I rewatched the scene where he was at her bedside when she died, or when she was dying, and there were no photos of the husband. And I was like, there is nothing not intentional in the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
So like, why would there not be pictures of the husband? Because that was like, what, the 50s. One of the biggest things in American culture at that time was happy families and portraying happy families. Why wouldn't you take a picture with your husband? Maybe if recording him on video or film of any sort would cause some real flags to go up in people who knew him, who like know he died. All of these things would just like explode. Like if you develop some photos with Captain America who was on war bonds and like posters promoting, you know, like all of these things, like that goes poorly for a lot of people. So it's like, I'm thinking, hey, he went back to the main timeline. He was always the husband and just lived off the grid, essentially. Like he never went into photos, et cetera, et cetera. And something that happened in Black Widow, ironically, kind of for me reinforced it.
Okay.
Do you remember Red Guardian, while he was in the prison, he was telling this story about how he fought Captain America.
Right.
And everyone's like, that's not, that you're crazy. He was frozen at the time. What if on the low, Peggy was like, hey, got some shit I need you to take, I need some shit taken care of, but super low key. I can't send any of my regular guys. I need you to go. You go to Russia, like to Russia. Like, so that fight did happen, but it happened with future Cap, but no one believes him because Cap was frozen.
Right. So I do think, address that one first. I do think that it's entirely possible that Cap goes back in time and still superheroes under a different alias or with a different outfit, you know, because you see Ant-Man, you see Hank Pym going around and doing espionage and whatnot.
Yeah, in the 80s, right?
We hear about Goliath.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
So it's entirely possible that Cap is running, that Steve Rogers is, because there's two Steve Rogers in the timeline then.
Yeah.
But
modern Steve.
Our Steve Rogers is running around in a different outfit, in a different guise, you know, as Nomad, as any one of the aliases that he has throughout the comics. So that could be interesting. I do think that the Russo, as I was prepping for this and prepping for the inevitable, you know, the Russos said this and the writers said this, part of the debate. What both the writers and the Russos did that I think we do have to acknowledge is there were 5 million things that they were thinking about and 5 million different subplots and this and that. And they were so close to the end that they wanted to tie up some storylines and open up some others, right? It's like, hey, we're gonna hand you this opening and this one and this one. So now you have the potential to tell all these different stories, and we're gonna wrap up Steve's story. I do think it's possible that the Russos just said, let it be the next guy's problem, you know, and
certainly possible. I will fully accept that.
And writers do that all the time. That's on a practical level.
Yeah, that happened. It happened in a Batgirl when they did the what do they call her? Batgirl of Burnside, the suit that's coming in the movie. When they
Yeah.
did that, they literally, the previous writer had set up this whole, literally like the last scene of the previous run was she becomes a roommate with this young lady, and she's like, I'm here, I'm going to protect you, I'm not going anywhere. Literally says, I am not going anywhere. The first panel of the next issue, which is a different team, she's leaving and says, you'll be fine without me.
What was I watching? I was watching so I do Marvel Unlimited, and they had a special screening last week. And the writer of Kraven's Last Hunt was on there. And it was funny because Kraven was this character that nobody cared about.
Yeah.
And then he did Kraven's Last Hunt. And suddenly all these writers wanted to use Kraven, but he had killed him.
Yep. That's how it goes.
And obviously Kraven eventually does come back, but
not for a long time. They technically like Dan Slott just resurrected him.
Yeah,
he stayed just dead. Happened.
Yeah, he stayed dead for a long time, and
he was replaced. There was a suddenly there was a copycat dude, and then it was one of my favorite things. And there's a storyline from like 97, 98, I want to say, where Chameleon believes that he's Kravenov's brother.
Oh,
and it's super interesting. And he keeps saying that he's like, I'm a Kravenov. And he's like, no, he's like, you're Smerdyakov. And there's this moment where he traps Peter, and he's like, I'm going to go visit your wife, because he finds out who he is. And he shifts into him. And there's that moment kind of like in the Spider-Man animated series where he's like, shocker, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth, right? It's just that. And he's just like, you see him scream out his last name. And I thought it was hilarious. I was like, I see the reference there.
And so I do think on a like understanding the way that writing works and whatnot, the Russos just said, this is going to be the next guy's problem. Now, I will say, like, and this did bother me, and I loved Endgame. I really did love it.
It's still my number one.
I will say, when I saw the previews and I saw they were going to do time travel, I wasn't crazy about that at first, but they made it work.
Yeah.
So I was okay with it. Because time travel is always messy when you start to deal with it. And so for me, and this is I think where fanboys really get into it, is it's like, we want the logic to work. Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. For me, it's got to make sense logically. It's got to make sense logically. And if you were to literally tell me, oh, it's like, that's how magic works in this universe, it's like all the stuff in Doctor Strange. I didn't challenge a single thing in Doctor Strange. Magic. It's all magic. This is how it works. Okay. as long as you give me a reason why it works.
Right. They have to have in-universe reasons why it works, and it has to stay consistent.
Yep.
And I do think, I suspect that there's been a little bit of inconsistency when it comes to time travel.
For sure.
And there's been a certain amount of the rat walking across the quantum generator type of stuff, right? It's like, look, we just need to get from A to B as quickly as possible. Yep. Let's just put a rat in there and
it's honestly something like, I think they did it for the lulls, like that moment. It could have been a security guard. It could have been his buddy who found out where the van was taken and was just like futzing around with the buttons.
Yeah.
Like they could have done it in a way that made more sense, but they were just like, fuck it, let's just have a rat run across it.
Just rat run across it. I need to get on with the story. And you know, and this way we don't have to have any actors in for the day except for the rat.
Right.
But what I will say is the way that they set up time travel. And I actually it was funny, I had a group of teens come in for a Bible study, and we ended up drawing on the whiteboard how I thought time travel worked. And in the MCU, or the way that it made sense and the way that I explained it to the kids, and I still hold this, is it's not time travel, it's timeline jumping, right? It's jumping from one timeline to another and back, because it doesn't make sense to me. First off, the traveling back in time and becoming your own grandfather just doesn't make sense. The Kate and Leopold type of time travel.
Well, that does that's the persistent timeline like theory that's out there. Right. And that's where all the paradoxes come in. That's like, if you go back and kill Hitler, you will never have needed a reason to go back and kill Hitler, and then you never kill Hitler. Therefore, like, it just becomes this loop of nothing happens. Yeah. And that's exactly what they did in they kind of did like a modified version of that in Back to the Future. He went back, and if his parents didn't get together, he was going to disappear. But then it becomes like, if he never came back to fuck things up, he would have still been born. But they didn't want to deal with that, so he still wins at the end and gets them back together.
Right. And that's why I made the video saying that Marty travels back in time. And the moment he travels back in time, the butterfly effect creates a different timeline. And they do draw this out in Back to the Future too. Doc draws, okay, they're wrong in Back to the Future about how time travel works.
Well, they can't be wrong. We don't have any evidence of real time travel. It's all theory.
And when I say that they're wrong, they're mixing time travel ideas when it suits them. In
the second one they did that, because when he drew that out and he drew the second timeline as a separate thing, that's incorrect based on what they did in the first one. Because in the first one, trying to say. Yes. In the first one, they set up if you make a change, it changes everything after. And if effectively the way it would have been is if he had some way of, they actually did this really well on that X-Men animated series. Like, it like made the most sense weirdly when they gave Bishop that bracelet. When Ford gives Bishop that bracelet, it takes him out of time. So when he goes back, any changes he makes changes the future. When he comes back to an entirely different future.
Right.
So that's what they did with Time Cop. Time Cop was the same way.
Yeah. And so like the problem I have, do you remember the third Harry Potter where they kill the Griffin? They're about to kill the Griffin.
Yes.
And a pebble gets thrown at the window, distracts everybody, and they free the Griffin.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, right.
Right. The problem is you need a reality where the Griffin dies one time. It has to die. One version of the Griffin has to die.
Right. It's the Bill and Ted. It's the Bill and Ted.
Yes.
It's the fight at the end where it's like, well, I'm at the end of this. When I win, I'm going to go back and give myself this. When I win, I'm going to go back and give myself this. And all these things just appear. You have to remember to do all those things. Otherwise they never happen. You're correct. Right. They were still in Harry Potter, they were still functioning with a persistent timeline. One time it did die, but they were like, if we go back and it doesn't, like, somebody did the math, everything went wrong. Somebody did the math and they're like, if that Griffin doesn't die, everything works out the way we need it to work out. Cool. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to throw a pebble and we're going to set this in motion so that at some point, I'm still going to go back and throw that pebble.
Right. And so one of the things I did want to do, and I apologize that I didn't get to it, was I did want to look at the Young Avengers comic and spoilers for anybody that hasn't read the Young Avengers.
Yes.
Pause it here.
All spoilers. It's an all spoilers podcast.
Right. But Iron Lad turns out to be Kang.
Yeah.
A young Kang who finds out what he becomes and tries to go back and change his future. And it creates this funky paradox. It causes reality to collapse. And I didn't get a chance to reread it. And so, and I had wanted to, because
all Kang things are so incredibly complex and Marvel.
Right. So the way the time seems to work in the Marvel universe. And somebody actually asked me this, why do you keep saying, oh, my daughter, she said, why do you keep saying the MCU? And I said, because the MCU is a subset of Marvel, right? But it's its own animal. So the MCU is setting up its own logic, but the way it seems to work is you travel back in time, and that can cause a change in the future. The thing is, so like in Days of Future Past, when older Kitty Pryde travels back and meets younger Kitty Pryde,
right,
to change the future, or no, the other way around. Sorry, younger.
No, you're right. When Kate Pryde goes back, takes over her young self body.
Right, and the thing is the moment she does that, she has already altered the future.
Yes. And that's
matter what.
And in the Marvel comics, that remains a different timeline. She's from Earth 161 as opposed to the primary 616.
Yes. And so that's what I was saying about Marty, is there's a timeline where Marty's parents have no idea what happened to him.
If it was in the Marvel universe, I would agree with you. But based on the internal logic that they created for themselves within that, the Back to the Future universe functions in a persistent timeline, because everything they do kind of self-fulfills. Because Marty's stuck in 1955, dude shows up at the end of number 2, dude shows up with the letter, hey, we've been holding this for 100 years or whatever to deliver it on this road at this time. Like here. So like that the end of 2 happens because 3 happens.
No, the end of 2 happens. So Doc goes back in time.
Yeah, Doc separates, falls off.
Doc gets killed in 1885 by Buford Tannen.
Right.
Gets killed. That timeline plays out. Marty gets the letter in 1955, goes back, creates now another branch timeline.
If we were doing the multiverse, but there's no evidence of a multiverse in the Back to the Future. And Back to the Future, well, certainly not yet. Someone's bound to go wild with it. I really want them to do a reboot just to show like all of us how old we are. It's like they're gonna go back to 1992. Ouch.
Right. It has to be 5 for whatever reason. It has to be like 95 or I guess it's 30 years ago. Yeah, but
no. The way they set it up is that there was one universe where Doc does die when Marty gets in the car.
Right.
But Marty changes that by leaving that letter. So thus Doc protects himself. So Doc doesn't die when he comes back.
The thing is when Marty comes back, see, I don't think it's a persistent timeline in Back to the Future, even though they think it's a persistent timeline, because they never address the issue of that Marty comes back, and for a brief time, there are 2 Martys in the same space-time. And one of those Marty
near space-time, because he arrived before his younger self left, but not in the same place. We have to go to time cop rules. You can never be in the same physical space as a past version of yourself. Now, what happens? I don't know if you've seen the show. It goes ugly. Let me tell you, it goes real ugly, real fast. Right. That's an actual thing. I forget what the theory is but it's an actual like physics theory where the same molecules can't occupy the same space.
Right. So it's one of the paradoxes, and I don't remember which one it is either. But there is a moment where they're near space-time, and so younger Marty goes back to 1955, creates a whole nother parallel universe. That Marty is now inhabiting younger Marty's.
But look, no, he's not. Here, and this is how you know. remember, when he goes to 1955, he crashes and knocks down one of those pine trees. When he comes back to see himself leave, it's not Twin Pines Mall, it's Pine Mall. That's because he changed the timeline, but he's still watching himself leave from that timeline.
Right. No, because that Marty. Right. So he goes back. Hold on. Original 1985 Marty, whose dad and who the whole family are losers.
Yes.
He travels back to 1955, creates a new timeline where his parents are now winners. But his parents conceive a different Marty, who we're calling younger Marty. That Marty gets to live in that new timeline,
right?
The Twin Pines Mall timeline, right? Gets to live
the single pine, the single
pine gets to live in that timeline,
right?
Marty then takes over for younger Marty in that timeline. This is very Rick and Morty. Takes over for younger Marty. Younger Marty then goes back in time, and he's going to create a third timeline, and so on and so forth into infinity. And this is exactly what
I'm gonna have to give it to you. That's good.
Thank you.
I gotta give it to you. You're right, because when he goes back in time, he is he opposes Biff. Why? Biff is a loser. Why would he care about Biff back then?
Yeah. So who knows what he does in that new timeline? Younger Marty does in that new timeline.
Wow.
And this is exactly, now I'm going to tie it into Kang. Kang doesn't like that. That's infinite and chaotic. And the problem with infinite when you're a dictator is there's a possibility of you getting overthrown.
Of course.
Right. So it's the same thing. If on an infinite timeline, if you live forever, eventually you are going to succumb to an avalanche, an earthquake, something. You'll still be alive, but you're going to be underneath tons and tons of rubble. Like,
you think so? You think it's inevitable?
On an infinite timeline, wouldn't everything happen to you?
If you put yourself in those situations.
How do you avoid them on an infinite timeline?
Well, like, there are people who go up to the top of a volcano to look into the flowing active magma. I would never be in that position. I might maybe get on a helicopter with a zoom lens about a mile away. Like, that's about how comfortable I am with an active volcano. But there are people who walk up it just to look and take pictures. And I'm like, you're insane people.
Well, so the question really becomes, so the problem is that the universe is finite in terms of time. Eventually the universe will cease to exist. So even if your life is infinite, eventually it can't be infinite because time will stop at a certain point, in theory, or at least in the Marvel universe. The universe stops and starts. And so unless you're Galactus, you can't live forever.
Right. Yeah. And that was an interesting thing that they added in with was it the Avengers? The new Avengers after the Secret War, they're on the 7th universe.
Yes.
Yeah, it was an interesting, I don't think that's ever paid off yet, because they had set up some stuff about like the encroaching void, like the forgotten universe or something like that, the dark universe or something that's coming.
Yeah. And I apologize. I mixed reality with comic books there. I kind of switched in the middle from reality.
I'm good.
But basically, Kang doesn't want to be deposed.
Yeah, because with an infinite multiverse, there are enough Kangs that he could at some point lose.
Right. And
if he loses, somebody else takes over.
Yeah. And I have actually another theory that it's not the Kangs that he's worried about, but rather the Illuminati. And that he actually wants Sylvie to stab him. Two things are possible. Either he's trying to prevent the Illuminati from coming, or the multiverse keeps coming unraveled in this circle. And he comes along and says, see what happens when I'm not in charge? when I'm not in live. This happens. Let me tie it all up for you again.
So here's where, and I definitely, I'm with you on the dictatorship model of the multiverse. Mm-hmm. Like, he's going to allow enough to happen. If there's a variation here and there, as long as it still leads to him being in charge, he doesn't particularly care. Right. So since he set up the TVA, those rules are made by him. So, and the chart that they look at, where if a timeline starts branching, they're not zoomed in. They don't know what that main timeline looks like. From their end, that's a single line. From his end, right, that could be 30, 40, 50, 100 million, you know, but as long as they're all bundled together and they all kind of loop around. I've always had this idea that in an infinite multiverse, some things still end up going into the same result. If you wake up in the morning and take a shower first, then eat, versus eat and then take a shower, most days that is not going to change anything. So yes, while those are two branch timelines, they're going to just collapse back onto each other when you get to the same point you were going to get to anyway. So that's how I see it. Yeah,
and we do see that with the diagrams, that the lines are, that not all the lines are parallel, that some of them do intersect. So in other words, it's like, even if you're on two different paths, we're both going to end up here.
Right. So,
you know,
yeah, it's like the difference is minor.
Right. And those are what the ancient one, what does she call them? Not nexus points, but fixed points.
Yes.
Those are fixed points in any timeline. These things are going to happen. Whether you shower first or eat first, you're going to work. That's a fixed point.
Right. In theory. But yeah, it's like, but like the decision to go to work or to not go to work, that is going to change the day, which could change everything.
Correct.
So that goes a whole different, So yeah, some decisions are minor enough. Like if you have cereal for breakfast or eggs and bacon, like not a huge difference necessarily in a day.
So Cap goes back to, Cap from 2023 goes back to 1992 with Tony and all of them.
Right.
He whispers into the ear of whose name's escaping me, but the Hydra agent, Hail Hydra. Right. Now, who knows? The writers and the Russos may have just said, screw it. We just want to have a fight between two Caps, and we wanted to say Hail Hydra like in the comics, whatnot. He has created a different timeline.
But that timeline, specifically that timeline, was pruned. We saw it happen.
That's what confuses me with the whole pruning thing, is like, why is it the moment where Sylvie, this is the theory at least, that Sylvie at that moment thought, hey, I can become a hero. This is the a theory that's out there, right? She's playing with her toys and it makes her think she can become a Valkyrie, and that's why the TVA steps in. It was in that moment. This is a theory I think Mr. Marvelite presented.
Interesting. See, I went with a more biological reason. Granted, human biological, but a lot of it's transposed. Children, well, to start with, Loki in all shapes and sizes is a shapeshifter.
Right.
Children don't gain like a gender awareness typically very early on. So maybe that was the moment she chose to be female. And that's when they were like, all right, well, can't have that. That was where I came from.
So why though? So this is like what's confusing about the whole thing. And this is where I've kind of fallen in with the new Miss Marvel TV show and everything, and the Eternals, is these are all things we're going to have to judge at the end of the story. Right. We've only seen chapter 1. We've only read chapter 1. And on Kevin Feige's end, he's going, please let chapter 1 be good enough to make you want to read chapter 2.
Right.
It's like, but don't judge the whole story on chapter 1.
Of course not. Yeah.
That's, but that's a really unique thing that Marvel has started doing. And it's really changed storytelling in cinema, I think, is this idea of, hey, this movie, it's actually not a complete story, right? So what's confusing to me, though, is why wait till then? Why is it that the TVA didn't come in the second she's born? Why didn't that set off red flags? Unless there's a timeline where Sylvie, that doesn't happen to her.
Well, like that's why I came with it from the like biological perspective. Like, they're like, Loki's supposed to be male, so up until a certain point, up until a shapeshifter decides the form they're going to be, it's kind of up in the air, right? So maybe that was the moment when she's playing with those toys and she thinks maybe she could be a Valkyrie. Valkyries are typically female, identifies with that. That's when the decision point is. And they're like, nope, got to cut this one off. Like and it might have been one of those things where it's down here. It's floating right above that main line. They don't see it. She makes that choice and it just starts spiking up because it's completely different. So that's when they were like, oh shit.
I don't understand why when they are on, I was just watching the episode, Lamantis, and they're sitting next to each other. Mm-hmm. The planet's about to be destroyed. They're about to die. Why that creates a Nexus event? Even if they fall in love with each other, how does that change anything? Right? Know. Why is that not Loki's earlier point about at Vesuvius, which is I can tell you you're about to die and it's not going to set off any red flags. Right. And I do think they have an answer. I just don't think we've heard.
Sure.
I don't think we have that piece of information yet.
Here's what I think it could be. If they fall in love in that moment and they kind of just decide to just like run off together, we don't get the ending that we got. So like we need to interrupt this moment so that they can come here in X amount of days, minutes, years, however long he perceives the time as. But the one who remains is watching that. And he's like, here, we got to stop this. Otherwise, he's like, I see where this is going to go. I need them back down this way to preserve the sacred timeline, at least up until the point of the choice.
Well, he wants them to go through that door. He wants the TVA to save them. That's actually one of those.
Well, that's moments. What I'm saying. But the only reason that they send him there, the only reason it's going to, because if he doesn't save them, maybe joining together, maybe they get necessary power to teleport or something that takes them out of that. Or no, that's it right there. If they fall in love and die, they don't come to stab him. And like you said, he just needs them there in that spot. So he decides that is a variant timeline.
Well, yeah. What if he just pushed the button?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
He's up in the Citadel and he just pushed the button and just.
Because he knows everything. He knows everything.
He wants them. Everything that happens in the series. Here's, I think, one of the things people miss with He Who Remains. And then I want to get back to Cap traveling back to another timeline. But everything that he's not, what's the word when your narrator's not trustworthy? There's a word for it, I think, in literature, but he is not a trustworthy narrator. And I feel like everybody's treating him like he is. Right. Like we know not to trust him, yet we're taking everything he says and said at face value. Oh, there was a multiversal war. Oh, there were all these kings. Oh, there was this. Oh, there was that. And it's like, he's not, I think there are some facts in there.
Right.
And then I think there's a lot of manipulation.
For sure.
There.
And that is the way of the Kang, right? That is
right.
If you going back to the source material, that is just how Kang do.
Right. So, I wanted to bring up two other things with time, how time works in the Marvel universe. So you also have at the end of Secret Wars, and we'll go with the in-universe reason, not the out-of-universe Fox Fantastic Four stuff. But at the end of Secret Wars, the second one, the Fantastic Four are left on Battle World creating a new multiverse. Franklin Richards, basically, so where did the Fantastic Four go between 2015 and the new release in, what was it, 2020, 2021?
2019.
2019, right? It was right before COVID.
Right.
So, okay, just the out of universe reason. Fox had the Fantastic Four. Marvel was like,
well, Ike was a piece of shit. So like Ike was a piece of shit, and Ike was like, screw them. We're not going to give them any more material. Yeah, no, Ike was a piece of shit. He was an asshole.
So they put, so the in-universe reason, the in-universe stuff that they were doing was Franklin Richards and the Future Foundation, along with Sue and Reed, were recreating the multiverse. So Franklin, with his powers, was basically creating tons of new realities. Right? So
I genuinely don't remember this moment, so I've pulled it up in Marvel Unlimited.
you asked me to do my research.
No, that's brilliant. All I remember is that they did that. Like he just recreated the universe and the multiverse. That's what I thought happened.
No, what happens is, and if you read Future Foundation 2019, it was only a 5-issue run.
Yeah.
It's only a 5-issue run, I think. No, it's not Future. It's the first Fantastic Four. Sorry, it's Fantastic Four #2 of the 2019 run. Johnny and Ben find Reed and Sue and the kids, not just Reed's kids, but all the Future Foundation kids, in Battle World with that whole cadre. And Franklin's been making multiverses.
Yes.
And that's
I forgot about that. Because at the beginning, it's definitely at the end of Secret Wars. They show it right here. I love that. I do love that Sue, as strong of a character as Sue is, and as wonderful as she literally looks down at her daughter and she's like, "Do you want to break this down for me? Because this is beyond me." Like, she is a brilliant woman, but she is dealing in such ridiculous high level concepts that she can't even keep up. But I love that. She says, Owen is the key. He's a human repository to unlimited power, and that omnipotent power has to be directed, used by an individual, in this case, Dad. And that's where it gets interesting, as Franklin is a universal shaper, a dreamer. He has these dreams. He dreams up multiverses, gives them to Dad, and Dad, using that power, spins them off into their own reality. So that's why at the beginning of the 2019 series, they are literally just hopping realities, because he's just been out there shaping.
Yeah, and he's just been, and it's really kind of
which
sweet,
is why
right?
Earth 65 exists. I was wondering, because they never addressed it in the Spider books, but post Secret Wars, I never understood why Spider-Gwen was a thing, or Ghost Spider. I hate that they changed her title to Spider-Gwen again, by the way. I liked Ghost Spider.
Did they change it back?
Yeah, the new series it's like Spider-Gwen, Gweniverse or whatever. And I'm like, Ghost Spider is so much cooler.
I just don't think I don't think anything other than Spider-Gwen is ever going to stick with her. It's just
unfortunate.
Well, it's the same thing with Jean Grey, right? Jean Grey will never be, what was her original name?
Marvel
Girl. Thank you. Right? Like, she's always going to be Jean Grey.
That is ironic, because in the Age of Krakoa, everyone has chosen their mutant name as their, like, that's the name they go by. And that they kind of like make a big deal out of it at the beginning. And even now, even like recently, because they just showed the origin of, oh, is it Salome? I forget. I think that might be the name. It's like a newer character.
I'm a little behind. So
it was last year's Pride issue, Marvel Voices Pride. It was a new character, but it was like tied into Akihiro Dakin. It was like a past lover of his who had just recently died, like through natural causes, and was always like, he was always as an outsider, and they had like a tryst, but his power was to like live whole lives in his dreams. So like they had a one night stand. He's like, I was there for a one night stand, and we ended up living this wonderful life together all like in one night. It's like when I woke up, I couldn't deal with it, so I bailed. So he felt bad that this dude died alone and outside of his community, so they resurrected him, which I thought was cool. So it was kind of like a beautiful thing. It's honestly how they've handled Akihiro since his original creation, and him being this like really terrible fucking dude. I really love it. Like they have made him evolve in such a, man, the current era of X-Men is absolutely by far my favorite era of X-Men. Nonetheless,
and I know I was doing a long during COVID, I did a long Claremont run. I just, I was home and I basically reread the entire Claremont era. And so I was caught up, and then I went back, and then
I just got
I've just been like
the Claremont
I'm gonna have
omnibuses.
I need to go to a convention where he's at, but that's a whole nother story.
Dude, I met him once, just like I was at a show. I was just like in a different city, happened to be at a show, and I was like, holy shit, that's Chris Claremont. And he's such a cool dude, and he'll just like talk up X-Men for a minute. Like he's such a cool dude.
Totally seems it. So there's basically there's 3 models that I can figure in the Marvel universe.
Okay.
One is the Franklin Richards one above all model, not the celestial one above all, but the originator of the universe, which is basically like, you picture a sphere. What?
I know. The one above, it's Kirby.
Right. Well, I was just saying it for your listeners in case they didn't know what we were
they better know. They better know.
No gatekeeping.
No. It's that's one of the, like, I've read it, that run one time, that like 98 all the way to the Hickman stuff. I read that one time, and like most of it escapes me, but one of the most beautiful moments is when Reed is like fixed by the one above all, and it's they're like brought to Kirby's studio, and I'm just like, oh my god, that's awesome. Like that's so cool.
There's also a moment with one above all in Spider-Man where he's like, death is a part of existence. It's just, there's some really cool stuff there.
They do a really good job with that.
But basically the Franklin Richards one above all is, there's a sphere, and suddenly outside of that sphere, I'm just going to connect. I'm just going to like start like creating different lines going out of that sphere in different universes. And, that's where you get the omniverse and the multiverse and all of that. Right. But it has to have a catalyst, a someone or something starting it all. Right. So that's one model. The other one is the Kitty Pryde Days of Future Past model, where I can go back in time, but the moment I go back in time, I create a new timeline.
Right.
That's what the MCU seems to be to me. And then there's this third one, which I said, I didn't have time to totally research, which I think is the Young Avengers, Iron Lad type of timeline, and why Iron Lad can't stay in that timeline because it's going to destroy everything, which goes to that paradox and whatnot, but I don't know if that's a popular one in the MCU or if that was just a convenience for that. Like I said,
I think it was probably just a convenience. That's the thing is a lot of writers want to play with time travel, but they don't want to be beholden to existing models. So things like Fortress X and the Age of X-Men happen where they're like not technically time travel, not technically a different reality. Like I'm pretty sure at the end of Fortress X, that all happened psychically. It was like a localized thing that Legion created. It was a very complicated universe, but there was this one. I'm going to do a whole episode on that, so I'm just gonna leave that alone for now. But like for the Age of X-Men, they specifically said Nate created something like a paradise for mutants. So they specifically said that.
So that's Model 1, right? That is.
It's not, because at the end they destroy that universe. Like that universe fades out, and that universe's Magneto, this like fictional Magneto that Nate created, and Nate kind of stay to like maybe build something new. So maybe there's another universe that he created, but that universe that he creates was like a temporary thing. It definitely, like, they visually show it fade out.
Right. Well, it can be temporary in House of M, right? That's a temporary universe that Wanda creates.
But I still haven't read the follow-up series that they did like a year or two later, the House of M Civil War, and there was something else, House of M, that they did. Those couldn't have happened during the 8-issue run, like during the original House of M. They either happened before or after. So I don't know if they technically created a new universe. But that was another thing, is Wanda is a reality manipulator.
Right.
So she changed our reality. And like you said before, it's all dependent on the writing and the outside, right? Age of Apocalypse was the same way. It was meant to be a temporary thing. When Bishop went back, he fixed it, right? When he stopped Xavier from being killed, he fixed it. It's all fine now. But then like 10 years later, they're like 5 years later, they're like, hey, what if Nate Gray went back to the Age of Apocalypse? Well, that only works if the Age of Apocalypse is its own timeline and wasn't destroyed. So it becomes this whole thing. And yeah, it could very well not be a thing that comes back again. But I think in most cases, it is the Kitty Pryde model. Going back, making significant changes creates a different timeline, which is ironic because like she came back to maintain the main timeline, the core timeline, if you will, which I thought was kind of funny. Like when you said it, I was like, oh, like she did come back and make it, like technically make a new timeline, but it's just like we have, as the rulers of that multiverse, assigned that original timeline a different number.
Well, and right, that's why so much of what's going to be so cool about what the MCU is doing in phase 4 is when we look back at it and see what the implications are.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we look at these themes of control and ethnocentrism, right? It's like, well, my planet is the center of the universe, right? Gamora even says it in What If. She says, my planet. She doesn't say my universe, but she says my planet to refer to her timeline in her universe. We all think we're the stars of our story. Right. But the truth is, and this is what I think, I was thinking about this on my walk yesterday, is the Watcher and Kang are going to become the two paradigms for how to approach the universe, right? The Watcher loves the chaos, loves the infinite, loves free will,
right?
Loves it so much that the Watcher won't interfere. That's how important free will is to the Watcher.
Right.
Kang believes in predetermination and wants everything to go down a certain road. And so these two characters are going to become these metaphors for two very different ways of understanding the universe. And now maybe you can see why, as a rabbi, I'm really into into these stories.
Sure.
Because I think that they actually symbolize two very different approaches to theodicy, theology, and God. Not to get too big.
No. That first word, I've never heard it before.
The theodicy is God's role in the universe.
Never. That's a new one for me.
Yeah. So theodicy is basically to simplify it, right? To Sue Storm at the end of Secret Wars. I'll be Val. Sure. Is basically, why do bad things happen to good people? Or why do bad things happen? Either God makes them happen or allows them to happen.
Oh, this is an easy. This is a math problem. I figured this out years ago. I love this. This is my favorite thing to tell people. This is a problem I figured out a long time ago, because it's like the classic, if you will, idea of God is that he's all knowing, all powerful, and good, right? All like caring, all caring, all loving. Mm-hmm. I say you can only have two. If he knows all and can do all, he doesn't love us all. If he loves us all and can do all, he doesn't know all. So he's missing something. That's why bad things happen. And if he loves us all and can do all, he doesn't know it all.
So I'm going to say, I'm going to do a TikTok on that, on that math that you just did, right? Because the Watcher is all-knowing, is the all-powerful and all-loving, but doesn't know everything, which is why he can't interfere, because he doesn't know what the outcome's going to be. This is why the Watchers, right? Because why are the Watchers Watchers? Is because initially they did interfere, right?
Yeah,
and
they screwed things up.
Technology. What?
They screwed things up. They broke the Star Trek Prime Directive. They saw what happened, and then they're like, shit, we can't do that no more.
Because they don't know everything. And they have an extreme they have an extreme reaction to it, by the way.
Right. It's an overcorrection, as they say.
It's a total overcorrection, but their thing is, hey, since we're all powerful and all loving, we can't interfere at all. We just have to observe.
Which is technically the Prime Directive, the Star Trek Prime Directive.
Exactly.
That's fair. Interesting.
Exactly.
Kang is all-knowing and all-powerful, but does not give a fuck.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Because you know what? Even that tracks even in the comics, even going back to like early What If, you can sense the sadness, and like when he recounts a universe that went bad, there's a sadness to the Watcher, like, oh man, that kind of sucks that happened. Like he feels bad about it, but it's nothing he could do about it.
He says his speech to the to Black Widow, his speech to Black Widow at the end of What If is incredibly poignant, incredibly powerful, right? She is every human being talking to God. She is every human being talking to God, saying, why did you let this bad thing happen? We're just entertainment for you. And he goes, no, I love you. You are precious to me.
Right.
But like any parent, you have to let your children have free will. But he does, this is the thing though, right? Is the Watcher's not totally like,
he's not completely hands off. Well, our Watcher, the Uatu is not. Yeah.
He puts, because what does he do? He puts Black Widow on the helicarrier. For a brief moment, for a very brief moment, I was like, oh my God, that's how they bring Nat back. Like proper MCU. And when he put her in that universe, I was like, okay, I guess. Like I was disappointed. As was I. So to go back to it, right? I think that we have two models in the MCU. One is one above all created multiple timelines, infinite timelines, right? Starts with the singularity, creates multiple timelines. Kang comes along and starts pruning those timelines.
Right.
Much later, comes back, starts pruning timelines that he doesn't like.
Sure.
What if are the timelines that Kang, for whatever reason, doesn't mind and doesn't prune? So
I would say if anything, the only timelines he doesn't prune, the only timelines he allows to remain as kind of that center beam, if you will, the sacred timeline, are ones that ultimately end in the same point as we discussed before, and that is his birth.
Right.
Every timeline, regardless of what else happens along the way, every timeline that ends it with his birth is fine, because it still ends at that terminal point that he requires. And anything that falls off of that timeline is the stuff that pulls up on the pulls up the red alarms and shows up on the screen.
And that's why Captain Britain can still exist, because she's going to come.
That's still not her name. They're still calling her Captain Carter.
Captain Carter. All right.
Because they're going to bring in Captain Britain, and it's going to be Henry Cavill, and I'm going to be very happy.
Okay, totally fair. Totally fair. But that's so Captain Carter in Multiverse of Madness is going to come into the main MCU timeline, right? Her shield's on the poster.
That's a wild statement. No.
Her shield's on the poster.
No, it's not. Sir.
Yes, it is. It's in one of the shards. It is one of the shards.
He'll see her universe for sure. He'll see her universe.
So,
I don't think he's gonna. I don't think she's gonna be in it. Like, we might get a Haley Atwell cameo.
What?
We might get a Haley cameo, but Haley's not coming back.
No. What I'm saying is that it's to your point that these timelines start to merge, right? Somehow her existence leads into the timeline, and Doctor Strange from our universe, both of their existences meet up at a certain point and eventually lead to Kang.
And here is where I think this is where I think we diverge. I think what you just said right before you talked about Captain Carter is correct. All of those things were true until the moment Sylvie decided to stab Kang, the one who remains. They technically never called him Kang. And when he looked up, and I really do think, I know this is something fun people did on TikTok and YouTube, where you line up the last whatever minutes of Scarlet Witch and all that. I completely believe that Wanda, upon like choosing to own that power, is the reason that he was like, oh shit, finally I can go to sleep. Like, I can let this woman stab me and I will survive, or I won't survive, and this all goes to hell and I don't care anymore because I've been here forever. That's because he has that moment where he's sitting there and he's like, all right. Like, he has that kind of like break moment, and they timed it, and it makes it like lines up, and I believe that. Here's the thing. Yeah. Up until that point, I think you're completely right. Every timeline, every subsequent timeline that existed was all to serve him existing. And any hugely variants that would create a different Kang were pruned. The problem, by the way, that also could very well be a reason why they didn't prune Sylvie sooner, because maybe in deciding to be a Valkyrie and be something else other than Loki, Kang is born sooner, or something else happens where a different Kang is born. No, that actually makes perfect sense. I think that explains a lot of the original, like everything that happened pre the last episode. And the last episode, what if, does not exist without that last episode. The multiverse that we see is post that last episode, because in the last episode he dies, the universe splinters because the TVA is no longer pruning all timelines that lead to anything other than one Kang. The TVA that he returns to, that Loki returns to at the end, is the TVA of one Kang.
Right. So I want to say two things, and unfortunately I'm going to have to run just because it is getting.
For sure.
I'm an hour ahead of you. I have so enjoyed this though. But I was going to say, so there's two things. One is I've heard that theory about Kang. I've heard that theory about what if happening only happens because Kang gets stabbed in the multiverse splinters. But the Watcher never sounds like that's the case. The Watcher sounds like he's been watching these universes for eons and knows
he has
stories.
And he has, because if you remember, the timeline splintered retroactively.
Right.
So the events of Loki, exactly. But the events of Loki happened outside of time space. So the multiverse did not exist until after that, until after the events of Loki, which canonically happened after the events of Endgame. Because everything that happens, they say at the beginning of Loki that the Avengers did everything they were supposed to. So while I will accept, I don't like it on a moral level. I will accept that Steve could have lived a separate timeline with her, because he would have kept his nose down, because he was told one possible win. He called one possible win scenario. He was told this. He's like, if you fuck with anything, we may not win, and all of this is for nothing. So he says, cool, I'm going to shut my mouth. I'm going to live this quiet, humble life. No one's going to know I'm here. And that's why. Yeah. So is it weird? Is it like, oh, so he never went to save Bucky? He never went to, all these things that he could have stopped. He could have stopped Hydra. All of these things he could have stopped. Yes, but that wouldn't have led us to a victory. We lose if he does that. So, but maybe he doesn't comprehend that it's a different timeline. But even then, he still wants that timeline to survive. My only problem there comes in, how did he get back? Because there's and I get that he still had the tech, and I would understand that, but that tech was time travel, not cross-dimensional travel. It does not change timelines.
What we're calling time travel, this is what I was explaining to the students, right? Is what we're calling time travel is timeline jumping. Watch the video that I made like just before we got on together.
I saw it.
Tara did not the one with the Bible. There was a different
one. I saw that one too. Literally right before we got on.
Sacred storyline.
Yeah.
Right. Like I love this idea of calling it the sacred storyline instead of timeline, because it's actually very misleading to call it a timeline. It's misleading to call.
Yeah, it's and I think that's a good way to look at it. And because like we just agreed, Kang allows all things to happen as long as they come to arrive at his birth, which is fine. And I fully accept that. My only problem that becomes that, why does he and I understand that going back, they are creating a new timeline by going back, but they are not going into a timeline that already exists. So that will be my thing. Now, granted, if we also agree that Steve might have been out there running around with a different costume, different, maybe a different shield. Hell, that might be why he goes to Russia. They stole the only other shield, and that's why he has a fixed shield for Sam. Very reasonable explanation for that. But yeah, so if he's out there doing stuff covertly, could he have potentially found a way to jump timelines? Sure. But the only thing is, there was no sound effects. He was just there. He knew where they were going to be. He was just there.
Well, this is where I do think, to go with the writer's explanation that he was at the funeral, I think he jumps back a few years earlier.
Interesting.
I don't know why. Who knows what happens to the Peggy in his timeline, but he jumps back. I think he comes back right after or during Civil War.
Bold.
I have nothing to prove that. It's
sure. It's purely conjecture completely.
That one I have no proof for, other than the writers saying that he was at the funeral.
The writers said that.
Right? Don't the writers say
that? But I do recall that being mentioned somewhere. I don't remember who said it, but to me that reads as, we intended him to always be the husband. We wrote it as in we are sending him back to be that husband, which is why he was at the funeral. That's how I always put that together.
And I'm pretty sure that's probably how the writers intended it. But what was it? You have a great saying, right? Once something becomes, that's what it always was, right? Isn't that what you say?
Once it's canon, it's always been canon. That's why, why people who are like, oh, like Wanda used to be this, that, or the other thing. Yeah, but now she's not, therefore she never was. If it's something that changes things, like, oh, Iceman is gay. Cool. Iceman was always gay.
Right.
Period. That's it. That's how the stories work. That's how storytelling works. If you decide as the creator or writer or whatever that something now has always been, we now have to accept that has always been. Period. Like there's no, we don't get to debate about it. And it's funny because when everyone was like, oh my goodness, Iceman is gay, how could they do this? I literally sat back and I was like, explains this moment back there, explains this moment back there, explains his string of failed relationships, heterosexual relationships. I was like, this really kind of polishes Bobby off as a character.
It actually deepens it, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't the intention of any of those writers for his failed relationships to be the result of being closeted. But it works, right?
It completely works.
So I do think that the writer's intent at the time was for it to be one continuous timeline, but I don't think it makes sense with the rules that we're getting now. And so I think it's going to have to change that canon retroactively. That means that he traveled back for some reason to be at that funeral and be a pallbearer, which, by the way, would make an awesome comic book.
Oh, but that we get into dicey territory there because tie-in comics definitely end up like being overwritten because they even did there's that what's it called, Fury's Big Week or whatever, which I didn't even know. But if we take that as canon, the events of Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America, like the end of Captain America, well, the beginning and the end of Captain America, all take place in the same week, and Hulk. Like that's crazy.
It's insane. But the point being is that they're gonna have to reckon with some of the time travel logic, with some of the statements that they've made that are contradicting some of the logic that's being established.
Of course.
And I think they know that. And I think that there's going to be two reactions. One is what I call the home trilogy reaction, which is like, you know what? Just shut up. When does this take place in the timeline? It's or do you remember there was a William Shatner skit on SNL where he's at a convention and these Star Trek fans are raising their hands and he looks at them and he goes, "Get a life, people."
I do remember that. Do remember that.
So we're going to have one of two responses from Marvel. One is going to be the "get a life, people." Like, leave us alone.
But they can't say that because their bread and butter is this discussion. Countless variations and iterations of this exact discussion.
For sure. So, like I said, I think it's going to be a small part of it, but I do think that's going to be, ultimately, they're going to explain 98% of the stuff, 99% of the stuff satisfactorily. And if you pull on the string too much, there's just going to be some stuff that just doesn't make sense. And they're just going to say, you know what? It just doesn't matter at that point. But I do think that timeline jumping, multiverse jumping is where they're going, right? Is what is now going to be canon.
Sure.
As opposed to what Back to the Future thought it was, which was
the persistent timeline.
Yeah.
And I
like how I basically said that Zemeckis doesn't understand his own films.
Oh yeah. That's fine. many, I mean, but this happens to many creators over the years. Like they write a thing and then it's like, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. But like if you do it this way, it makes sense. And then everyone's like, yeah, but yeah, that's fine. We're gonna just do this. So it's like the original writer was like A, and they're like, nah, B.
Right. And that's what I think we're ultimately going to get is there was just, they have done something. I actually made this point on Straw Hat Goofy's comments section, which was, he was saying, why do DC movies not get the love that the MCU movies get? That's a paraphrase. That's a paraphrase. I'm paraphrasing it.
Right.
But basically the point that I made in 140 characters was the MCU really did something revolutionary in terms of film, telling a story over 22 films.
Yeah.
Whether you thought it was good or bad, whether you thought it was amusement park or whatnot, they added a type of storytelling to the film landscape that had never existed before. And like most things like that, there's gonna be some holes. And there's gonna be some things. It's like when I read the early Fantastic Four and they go to meet the Inhumans for the first time, and Sue Storm is sitting on a rock lamenting that nobody has noticed her new haircut. And I go, okay, Stan, I know it was the 1960s. And you tell a lot of stories that really do deal with the generational struggles of, the greatest generation and the boomers. I'm going to give you a slight pass on this misogyny. In this moment, it's still not okay, but I understand the time it was written, and we'll fix Sue. And right, because you're saying, right, is here's Sue, the smart character who's been developed over the years, who at one point was basically just this. And by the way, Janet Van Dyne, same thing with Hank Pym. She gets smacked by Hank across the face and doesn't walk out.
She becomes this what's it called? I forget the term, but it's like she becomes this like perpetual victim. Like she's always there, and like she's such a strong character. And even like she came up with the Avengers name. Like she is a foundational, like key core member, and she's always just pushed aside so much as a character. And she becomes this thing Hank is after, this thing Hank is sad about. She becomes a plot device for Hank. That's why I was really glad when they killed him off. Like when they said, oh, okay, now he's Ultron, and now we're gonna kill him off, and now he's just gone. Like I think he fell into the timeline or some shit at the end. Like he's like out of the fucking picture. And I was like, fuck yes. Now can we just have some proper Janet Van Dyne, like centered stories where she is a badass? Like there has been, so like I liked when it was her, she was a chairperson, and Scott Lang was on this was like the disassembled era, like right before disassembled, right when Bendis took over and just shat all over the Avengers. That I liked her in that era because she was a badass. She started doing, she was growing, although she did screw up, and that's why we got House of M, because she was like, how did you ever keep up with 2 kids, Wanda? What? I gotta go get a drink. Yeah.
But so I do think that we're going to have to reconcile the fact that there's just going to be some disappointments and some contradictions in terms of what the writers said and decisions that they made in the moment that, like you're saying, it's like we decided A, but A is going to write us into a corner, so we're going to go with B. But by and large, it seems to me that the way that time travel is working is it's really reality hopping. Like what Spider-Gwen does between Earth 65 and Earth 616. That's really what's going on. in phase 4, it seems to me.
Yeah, I can see that.
And that's the Franklin Richards just creates multiple different multiverses, or the butterfly effect, chaos theory, where I travel back and instantly by traveling back, I create new timelines,
right,
whatnot. But this Mobius strip allows me to go back to the original timeline. That's what Marty, because Marty has a time machine. Marty can never go back to his original timeline, where his parents are wits.
That's true.
He is forever.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna have to bring this up to my wife because she's a Back to the Future fan, and I'm just gonna crush her day one of these days because that's gonna just fuck her up. Like
he is forever separated from his biological birth parents.
Wild. Dang. Never thought about that.
Do you watch Rick and Morty?
Yeah, I've seen all of it.
Yeah, so Rick and Morty, I mean, this is what they deal with, right? Yeah. It's just this idea. What is it where he has like, none of the Ricks know that they're the real Rick or the real Morty, and they're all killing each other because everyone thinks that they're the Prime.
Yep.
So Prime Marty is just traveling through, creating these branch timelines. And that's another question. So I have this theory about branch and alternate timelines and variant and alternate people. And that branch timelines and variant timelines are basically propaganda by He Who Remains. There is no such thing as a branch timeline. There is no such thing as a variant. Everybody is just an alternate. Everything is just alternate. But He Who Remains.
But they had to have. Well, that only works. Yeah, that only works if you had a creator, like if you had a Franklin Richards creating like universes and multiverses. Yes, that works that way. But I think the way I see it is a branch timeline is a branch happens at a specific moment. So that could be like something happens that severely differentiates it from the timeline it was on, versus an alternate timeline, which is like somewhere further back, like you going to work or not going to work will create a branch timeline. 10 years from now, when in one universe you became a serial killer because you didn't go to work that one day, that is now an alternate timeline to the universe where you're a multimillionaire because you went to work. Like, right. Those are alternate timelines then, but like at the point of divergence is where it branches. Like that's the only way, like right. That makes sense to me. Because at some point, like unless you have someone creating like things that like, ingredients X, Y, and Z, ingredients X, Y, and A, just like everything the same except this one thing. Everything the same except this one thing. Like unless someone is like just serving those out into the cosmos, and though that's how you get just alternate timelines. But the way that, like, it doesn't make sense to me unless we just say that there is a Franklin Richards one above all. And it's like he's just literally, this seems like an interesting idea, kind of like what they did with DC with what's his face, Dr. Manhattan. Mm-hmm. He was like, well, this is an interesting universe. What if Superman showed up later? That's literally what they said was Flashpoint. It wasn't Flash's fault. It was the Dr. Manhattan being like, wonder what the universe would be like if he showed up later.
And so it the one thing I will say, and this is a hill I might have to plant my flag on a little bit more strongly, which is He Who Remains is not a nice guy. He is a dictator. Yeah. He Who Remains is Omar Gaddafi, is the Ayatollah, is right, like
Putin.
Is Putin. These guys can be charming. They can have friends. They can make you laugh. They can be seen silly. It is their Machiavellian tendencies, the fact that they keep their friends close and their enemies closer, like nobody rises to power because they're a total schmuck.
It's true. That's very true.
Nobody gets loyalty because people dislike them. Part of it is fear, but also we have to acknowledge that dictators do favors for their friends. They might, make fun parties that while other people are dying in the street, by the way, right? That basically He Who Remains puts a value on certain people, like a certain person who from 1932 to 1945 did, puts a value on certain people and devalues others and says, these are worthwhile, these aren't, to meet his own ends, right? So He Who Remains says these timelines are valid and these ones are invalid.
Right. But it's all self-serving.
It is an allegory, if you will, for the way that dictators work. He calls himself a dictator.
Yep.
Like 5 times, but he laughs about it. He's charming about it. Oh, I'm a dictator, but I'm a nice dictator. He wanted to get stabbed. We're missing information still.
We're missing information. Yeah. I think you're very right. And I think this is something that my wife and I said, he's because there is in this newly created, potentially infinite multiverse, there is a timeline in which that same dude is born. So he's going to show up. What I thought was she stabs him, he falls, it all goes to hell, and he just walks in the room. See?
I mean, that's what I'm curious about with the Illuminati. My initial thought is we're getting a secret war, right? We're getting
100%. We're getting a secret. We have to.
We're getting 2 sides, right? We're getting basically an Axis side and an Allies side. And so we're getting on this side, we're going to have the Young Avengers, we're going to have the Avengers, and I thought the Illuminati against Kang, and the Eternals on this side. I'll do a TikTok on this. And on this side, we're going to have Kang, the Eternals, and then the Celestials, right? We're going to have Kang, the Celestials, and we're going to have these groups over here. And that's what we're
because the Celestials are very much deterministic in their functionality. Yeah.
Right.
They say we created this world so that we could create another one of us so that we can create more worlds. They are a pure expression of the thing that a lot of fundamentalist types say, that like humans' only role in life is to create more humans.
Right. And so that's what I think we're getting set up here. What I don't know, what I keep vacillating between is what the Illuminati are going to be. And we're only going to find that out once Multiverse of Madness comes out.
And we are 100% assuming that an Illuminati is going to happen. There is some sort of court that he has brought before. We are placing a lot of information into it that we don't know yet.
Right. Because the question,
but it's valuable. Like it's what we're inserting is relevant.
What happens if Kang comes before that court and says, yeah, this whole thing that Strange did, I'll fix it for you. I'm going to clean this up for you. Much like a certain dictator did in 1932 when Germany's economy had completely collapsed. He said, see all this chaos? I'm going to fix it all for you. That's
I can see that.
That would be a fascinating thing. And this is why I say, like, so much of this is where, like, I want to say to like every college kid, like, this is what your graduate papers in film studies should be on, is the impact of the Marvel universe on Hollywood and storytelling. Because it is.
I feel you on that, because you know what, I had not thought about that, because like, yeah, you had like trilogies and you had movies told over several films, but those were never planned to be that way. They never planned to make 14 Alien films. They never, like, I don't even think Back to the Future was greenlit for a sequel until the first one came out. So like it's your kids, Marty, like was just like, we want people to like come back and watch the movie and talk to people about the movie so that they will give us money to make another one. It was not like the Star Wars trilogy, while yes, it was written as being a larger epic, the first film was a Hail Mary. They were not like, oh, we're going to make 9 of these.
Right. And what I would say is the difference between, like, when we were growing up, we knew that there was an expanded universe. Nobody tried to tell a story of an expanded shared universe. They tried to tell a story on screen. They tried to tell a story about a protagonist and that protagonist over several films. What Feige did was he told a story of a shared universe. That's why you can have a movie like Ant-Man and Iron Man and Thor and Loki, and it's this shared universe, which nobody ever did that before. Nobody ever created an amusement park.
Right. And
I hate that metaphor, and don't get me wrong, I'm not.
Somebody recently did try to like retroactively do that. M. Night Shyamalan, by combining Unbreakable and
what were the other two?
It was
everybody remembers
Unbreakable. It was a new one. It was the new one. With what's his face?
With McAvoy, right?
Yeah, McAvoy. Oh my goodness, I don't remember it. But nonetheless, yeah, when he said, "Oh, this happens in the same universe as Unbreakable," that like it felt like a toss on at the end. It felt like, hey, you know what's doing real good? The MCU, where they throw on a post-credit scene and people get psyched and they get to make another movie because people want to. Cool. Let me do that too. Hey, Bruce, what are you doing this weekend?
And it's so hard to do it organically.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same thing. Do you remember in the early 2000s when every movie was 3D?
Yeah.
No, not every movie was 3D, where some movies were made in 3D and then then
3Dized.
Then it's like, oh, Clash of the Titans, 3D.
Yep. Yeah, I do. Because
can you imagine being that director? It's like, hey, we want to make this 3D. I'm sure you've had this with your bosses, where it's just like, yeah, that's not what this is.
Right.
It's like,
that's why they made a big deal, because Avatar came out and Avatar was like the springboard for that. And then because you know they do the credits on the trailers from the producers of this or from the director of this. They did, what was it, Resident Evil, I think it was Afterlife, and it was like filmed on the same 3D camera that James Cameron used for Avatar. I was like, oh boy. And when I watched it, they literally had these like I don't want to say 3 minute, but like minute long sequences of just like, they're just in like fog and it's 3D. And I'm like, we could have saved like 15 minutes a movie by cutting all these 3D scenes out.
Right.
It's like, oh, cool. Yeah. Like I get it. They're in fog. Like having the fog feel like it's next to me doesn't really immerse me deeper. She's fighting zombies.
No. I will say, I know that you were reluctant to see it, but did you cave and see the Batman movie?
My wife wants to see it. We're going to go see it next week. I even talked to her. I was like, I really don't want to give DC money because of their lack of direction and their lack of just like overall vision. If they said tomorrow, they were like, hey, this is our Kevin Feige, whoever it was, honestly, I don't even care who it is. If they just had one and said, this is our Kevin Feige, they are going to just direct this for us, navigate the waters. Cool. Okay. Someone has a vision. That's all I care about. Because that's the biggest problem for me was they were like, they rushed into the shared universe thing. They were like, Batman v Superman, we're going to throw in Wonder Woman, 15 other cameos. And then they were like, Justice League. And then that fell apart because obviously some personal tragedy in Zack Snyder's life, but also they were down his throat about the editing and they wanted this and they wanted these changes. They were like, oh shit, people like didn't really respond well to this like super grim dark universe. Maybe we throw in some more jokes. And he was like, I am out, bitches. And then they brought in a guy who directs nothing like Zack Snyder, and that came out okay, not terrible.
It was serviceable.
Yeah, it was not great, which it needed to be. It really needed to be great. And then they were like, oh shit, I don't know if we know how to do a shared universe. And I'm like, no, you don't, because you're DC.
No, the reason why, and again, right, this is why, like, I should like just go to like USC and just tell the kids, like, here's what your paper needs to be on.
Do it.
Because here's the deal is movies, the paradigm. So I would say films were about the star, then it shifted to director as auteur.
Yeah.
And now producers. Sorry, Feige is an auteur.
Yeah.
No other studio has a producer that is an auteur.
Yeah.
And
a producer who can really the master chess player knows all the moves.
It's not even can. It's that they hired they are using the old model. The director is auteur. It's like, hey, we're going to create a shared universe using the same model that we've always used, which is the director's the auteur. That's not why Marvel was successful. They were successful because the producer was the auteur, not the director, right? That's why you can have all these different directors in the MCU, and they can be the auteurs of their individual films, but you can also switch them out at the last minute, right? Ant-Man, you could switch out the director.
But I think that was more so because it just didn't fit into what they wanted done.
But that's what I'm saying, right? Is not Feige.
Right, Feige. So Marvel and eventually Disney were like, you are the captain of the ship. Make the ship go.
Right. When we were growing up, it was Spielberg, Coppola, De Palma, right? They were.
Do you think that's why they hate on superhero films?
Yeah.
It's not that they actually think that superhero things, and they might, but it's not that they dislike them so much that they're going to go on record to talk shit about superhero films. It's that the director is no longer the thing that makes it happen. It's an ego problem.
Total. It's, it was funny. One time one of my jobs, I worked at a college and the kids were out in the lobby and they were listening to some type of like techno punk music. And I walked out and I said, listen, I know you guys like this, but I just have to like be meta for a second and just go, I have now become the next generation because this just sounds like crap to me. and it's like, it takes a certain level of ego awareness to be able to say, this is different. It works. It might not work for me. It doesn't fit my paradigm,
right?
But there's nothing wrong with it. For these guys, they created universes and they were the directors. No producer was going to come in and tell them, no, the shark is now, this is right. Jaws's cousin, right?
Right.
That's who producers were. Producers were the guys that were like, well, how are you going to make this work, Steven? Well, hell, there'll be a second island where there were dinosaurs. Love it. Go do it.
Right.
This is, that was Steven Spielberg's work.
That's true.
Right? Could you imagine the producer coming in and saying, listen, Steven, you have to add a scene where now there's a second island in the first movie.
Yeah, that's true, man.
And that producer would have been fired because no studio wants to lose Steven Spielberg.
They have lost their industry cred, their industry
Power.
Their industry power, clout, if you will. They have lost their clout, so they go on the internet and say wild shit to get clout.
Yeah. One of my favorite Simpsons lines, dear Mr. Abe, Grandpa's sitting in his old retirement home. Dear Mr. President, there are too many states. I recommend getting rid of 3 of them. Here they are. It's like, that's what I mean. Yeah, that is my worst fear, is turning into that person.
That's I had similar.
And he signs off. I am not a crackpot.
I had concerns about being that kind of person because there was like, I'm a hip hop fan, and the last like 5 years, if not a little more, of like mainstream rap just like grates against my ears. And I'm like, how can they listen? And it took me a while to just be like, they can, so I don't care. It's not for me. And that was one of those like moments of like, some shit is not made for you. You could just let that shit be.
This was actually not made for me. It is the great line in Loki when Sylvie says, this isn't about you. And I feel like that is a lot of that is the MCU saying to the fans, you don't want a female Loki? This isn't about you.
Right.
This is about the women that need a female Loki.
This is going back to our initial conversation at the beginning of this podcast. This is Turning Red is not for everyone. It's not meant to be for everyone. People are going to draw from it what they will draw from it. Have I ever been a young female with dealing with changes in my... No, I have not. But guess what? I've got mom stuff and I've got grandma stuff. I wept like a child at the end, like that, because that resonated with me. The connection, the family stuff, that is what resonated with me. Everyone's going to get something different out of a film.
Yeah. Are you kidding? The hormones and the torture that it is to be an adolescent in love with anybody other than yourself and to pine. I was like, I hear you, sister.
I pined through story. I created media.
That is brilliant. I tried to emulate media, but that's another story for another time. We have talked for a long time. This is going to be a long podcast for you.
It's fine. Honestly, this podcast has just super organically grown. I appreciate everyone that listens. People like I would look at my Anchor numbers and I'm like, wow, people are listening to every episode, and it's kind of awesome because I don't really like advertise.
Well, you'll get there. If look, hopefully I gave you enough stuff for a few episodes.
Well, I appreciate your time, sir. I appreciate your input. I love that we were able to have this conversation in depth because love the platform TikTok, but sometimes you just run out of time. It's such a different way of communicating for me. I'm a rabbi. I write sermons, I write 1,500 word sermons, and well, not even, I can't get away with 1,500 anymore. It's more like 1,000 to 1,250. But right, it's like to learn how to speak in 60-minute or 140 character limits. It's a whole different way of communicating for me. For sure. I think it is for all of us. I think we're creating a whole new method of communications. I've created all sorts of little shorthand for the comments and all that kind of stuff. It's been a wild ride. Absolutely. Listen, anytime you want me back, I'm always happy to come on. I appreciate the platform. I'm Micah, by the way. I don't know if I actually introduced myself properly. I saw it at the beginning, but appreciate that. Well, I'm Dalibor. I've been doing this podcast for, I think, a year now. I think I just started this last year. And then I would edit I still do a kind of like random, it's like non-comic book specific podcast where we just talk about whatever. It's literally called Tangents because we just start with a couple topics and go off. We had to institute a format this year because we were pushing 4 hours, and I was like, this is getting ridiculous, and it's like hitting upload limits. So we need to put a format on this.
I totally understand. Well, I got my last TikTok of the day to upload, so I'm gonna make sure that's edited and see if I got any hate from that pastor guy with his Bible. see what kind of it's hard too. It's like, sometimes for one thing, I don't want to give these guys attention.
There's always that. There's always that for sure.
No, I don't want to. It's like, you don't deserve the attention, but you need to be called out.
It's a tightrope balance. It's a fine line.
It really is. This was a blast though, man. Thank you.
Absolute fun time. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you for being here. If you are listening, if you are watching, make sure you follow at Pop Culture Rabbi on TikTok. Are you on Instagram or anything else?
Not yet. I am on Instagram, although I haven't really been posting. I think I'm going to start a Twitter soon.
Yeah, Twitter. Yeah, diving into the deep end, huh?
I think Twitter's going to be next. So look for at Pop Culture Rabbi on all your social media platforms. And I do have a YouTube channel, although I basically just upload my TikToks to it right now. I haven't really figured out what I want to do in that space, but this was a blast. Thank your fans for having me on, and anytime.
Appreciate that. That's going to be it for this one. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
They want to tell you about how they've been living before they go living. My vision is vivid. I wander the places they marvel. The shit that I'm talking is low-key a novel. Yeah, I'm so lit, but a lonely spark. About to end game like Tony Stark.